The first time I walked into Buncombe County Courthouse, the air felt heavier than it should have. It smelled faintly of rain and floor polish, a mix that reminded me of endings. The marble beneath my shoes reflected the ceiling lights in cold, sharp squares. In my hand was a sealed silver USB drive evidence disguised as something harmless. My pulse drummed in my ears, steady and unrelenting. I was not here as a victim. I was here as proof. A week earlier, my stepfather Martin had called. His voice was smooth, confident, the kind of tone people use when they think they've already won. "You'll never touch that money," he said. "Grow up." Then he hung up. No hesitation, no guilt. The silence that followed was louder than any insult. I had stared at the phone for a long minute, whispering to no one. We'll see what the court calls money. Now the same silence wrapped around me like armor. I reached into my purse and froze. My ID card was gone. My heart jumped, but before panic set in, a guard at the metal detector sighed. "Everyone's dropping something today," he said, pointing to the floor. A small gray rectangle glinted near my heel. As I bent down, a woman old enough to be my grandmother picked it up and handed it to me. "Don't shake," she murmured. "You'll be fine, sweetheart." I managed a smile, but my stomach tightened. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from my mother. "Don't make this a big deal. Martin said he just moved the money. It's all fine." I stared at the screen, the words tilting. She believed him. Of course she did. She always did. That text was not comfort. It was a warning. I pressed the elevator button and exhaled slowly. In my other hand was the small white case for the USB drive. When I opened it, my breath caught. 2 identical silver sticks rested side by side, one labeled Evidence, the other Spotify. For a moment, my brain refused to process the absurdity. I could almost imagine myself walking into court and playing my breakup playlist instead of a recording that could freeze a man's assets. I shut my eyes, muttering, "Not today." The elevator doors slid open. Inside, a young clerk balanced a cardboard tray of coffee cups. The scent of caramel and espresso filled the narrow space. I nodded politely, clutching the right USB this time. The screen above the door blinked each floor number, slow and deliberate, like counting heartbeats. The doors opened again to the courtroom corridor. People whispered. Shoes clicked. Someone's phone buzzed with a muffled chime. I stepped aside, pulled the USB from my pocket, and looked at the tiny reflection of my face on its metallic surface. For a moment, I saw the version of myself Martin always preferred, quiet, obedient, grateful. Then I blinked and saw what I really was. Not angry, not broken, focused. Martin thought I would stay silent forever. He thought my silence meant surrender. He did not know silence could testify. The college fund had not been his to touch. It was a promise from my grandfather, Dr. Charles Hart, a man who built his medical practice from a single rented room and used to tell me that knowledge was the only inheritance no one could steal. The fund held $1.2 million, enough to finish my degree and help others when it was my turn. Martin saw it as unclaimed property. He had called it dead money. He was wrong. I remembered the first time he mentioned family assets. My mother's face softened, trusting. He smiled, always charming, always composed. Behind that smile, he was moving pieces, signatures, authorizations, quiet transfers hidden under titles like Keene Holdings, LLC. I had seen the paper trail weeks ago, hidden under bank headers and vague memo lines. I had not told him. I had simply prepared. The courtroom doors opened ahead of me. The murmur of voices stopped as the bailiff spoke my name. My fingers tightened around the USB, the real one. I could feel its edges pressing against my palm. The lights above the judge's bench burned a pale yellow, humming softly. My throat felt dry but steady. I took my seat behind my attorney and waited for Martin to walk in. The last text from my mother flashed in my mind again. "Don't make this a big deal." She did not understand. It was not about a house or a signature. It was about something larger than both of them. It was about the quiet promise that money built on trust cannot be stolen without consequence. The clerk announced the case number, papers shuffled, doors closed. I looked straight ahead and whispered the words only I could hear. He thought silence was weakness. Today, silence will be evidence. March 2023 in Asheville carried the kind of chill that made the air sting slightly when you breathed too fast. I sat in my small apartment above a bakery on Haywood Road laptop, open a cup of instant coffee going cold beside me. The morning light cut across my screen in thin stripes, slicing through the numbers that did not add up. I had logged into the education trust account that once represented my future. The digits stared back at me smaller than they should have been. I scrolled, blinked, then scrolled again. A new entry appeared on the ledger. Transfer out $200,000 to Keene Holdings, LLC. The name meant nothing to me at first, but something in my chest went tight. I opened the transaction details, hoping for a note, an explanation, maybe even a clerical error. Instead, there was a blank memo line and a date. 3 weeks earlier, I should have seen it sooner. I leaned back, trying to remember the last email from the bank. Nothing came to mind. My cursor hovered over the search bar. When I typed the word statement, the result popped up in the promotions folder, buried between a grocery coupon and a sale ad for tires. The subject line read, Monthly Account Summary. I laughed quietly, the sound thin and dry. It had been sitting there for days while I searched for discounts at Ingles Market. That kind of irony would have made my grandfather shake his head. I clicked through old emails tracing months of small withdrawals, each labeled management fee or asset reposition. Someone had been careful. Too careful. Martin's name was not on any of them, but the company address matched the LLC he had once bragged about. Keene Holdings. I could still hear his voice during dinner 2 months earlier. You have to spend money to make money, he'd said, sipping expensive bourbon and showing my mother pictures of the new riding mower he bought. $8,700, top of the line. Cuts the grass, clean enough to golf on. My mother, Diana, had smiled with that uneasy pride she always showed when Martin acted like a man of business. For the family property, he said, patting her hand, it's an investment. He called everything an investment, even the things he took. I reached for the old folder my grandfather had given me before he died. Inside was the original authorization letter. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was still crisp. Under his signature, it read, Educational disbursement only. I traced the line with my finger, feeling the weight of that word. Only. It was supposed to protect me, but protection meant nothing when the people closest to you signed the forms themselves. I took a long breath and started writing numbers in a notebook. Each transaction, each date, each balance. Columns of what used to be a future. My heartbeat slowed steady again. I had been a data analyst long enough to know that every pattern leaves a trail. I was not going to scream, accuse, or beg. I was going to quantify. The apartment smelled faintly of bread rising from the bakery below. Outside, a delivery truck backed up with a soft beep. I wrote Keene Holdings, LLC on a sticky note and pinned it above my desk. I didn't need to understand everything yet. I just needed to watch. I remembered something Martin once said when I asked about joint finances. Transparency builds trust, but not curiosity. At the time, I had thought it sounded wise. Now it sounded like a warning. I opened a browser tab and began the quiet part of a revenge story money audit. A small search led to a public record. Keene Holdings was registered 2 years ago under Martin's name, listing my mother as silent partner. The irony hit me so cleanly that I almost smiled. Silent partner, indeed. I checked the trust account access log. The authorized signatories were my grandfather's estate lawyer and my mother. Martin's access must have come through her. I pictured him standing behind her while she signed his hand, resting gently on her shoulder, the same way he had guided her through every decision that conveniently benefited him. I could almost hear him. It's just a transfer, honey. Better rates, better returns. I looked at the time, 10:43 a.m. I opened a new spreadsheet and titled it, Heart Fund Observation. Each cell I filled was a pulse of control returning to me. Numbers had no emotion, but they could tell the truth. At noon, I reheated the same cup of coffee and stared out the window at the line of cars below. I thought of how easy it was for something as simple as a missed email to cost me $200,000. That was the part that made me laugh softly. Life could unravel in an inbox labeled promotions. That kind of accident felt almost too ordinary, the sort of story people tell years later as a joke, not realizing how much it cost to survive it. I switched tabs to my own accounts. I checked the password settings, and there it was, the automatic forwarding option to Martin's shared home email. My stomach dropped, then steadied. It wasn't illegal for him to read messages that went to a family address, but it was invasive. I changed the password anyway. The new one had no words, no meaning, just a random sequence of letters and numbers that no one would guess. It felt like locking a door that should have been locked long ago. I changed the recovery codes too, deleting every old hint that mentioned pets or birthdays. Martin loved to name things after his golden retriever, Scout. Every account, every password, every PIN. I erased that name from all my settings. It was not revenge, it was insurance. When I closed the laptop, the clock read 1:10 p.m. I felt lighter, not safe, but awake. I opened another tab and set a Google alert for the words Martin Keene and Keene Holdings, LLC. The form asked for my email, and I typed it carefully. When it confirmed subscription, I leaned back and smiled faintly. Outside, the wind carried the smell of spring rain over the mountains. My phone buzzed once. A text from my mother Martin's taking us to dinner at the club tonight. You should come. We'll celebrate his new investment. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I typed a single reply, maybe next time. Somewhere between the smell of bread and the sound of the traffic, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. He thought numbers were just paper. He was wrong. Numbers were evidence waiting for context. Dinner at my mother's house always had the same rhythm. The clink of silverware, the faint smell of lemon cleaner, and Martin's voice carrying across the table like a sermon no one asked for. That night, the roast chicken looked perfect, the lighting warm, but there was a tension in the air I could almost taste. My mother smiled too much. Martin poured himself a glass of wine and leaned back in his chair as if addressing an audience. College funds, he said, gesturing with his fork, are dead money. They just sit there when they could be working. He looked at me when he said working. The pause was deliberate, the kind that makes silence feel like accusation. I cut a piece of chicken and kept my eyes on my plate. Education isn't dead money, I said quietly. It's investment in people. He smiled thinly. Sure, but people fail. Real assets don't. My mother shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking between us the way she always did when a conversation began to tilt toward conflict. Martin, she said softly, not tonight. He shrugged, pretending to retreat, but his words lingered in the air like smoke. The doorbell rang before I could answer. My mother wiped her hands and went to the door. A young delivery man stood there holding a wine box. Delivery for Mr. Keene, he said cheerfully, setting it on the counter. Your card was already charged, sir. Martin nodded, signing the paper without looking, but when I glanced down, I saw the company name printed under the Total Keene Holdings, LLC. I blinked. The line below it read, account ending 2375. My stomach tightened. That was the last 4 digits of the education fund account. My mother saw it too. Her voice wavered. Martin? That's the college fund card, isn't it? He chuckled casual as ever. Relax. It's all managed through one account. I get better reward points that way. The delivery man hesitated, sensing the shift in tone, then hurried out. My mother looked confused but nodded slowly, letting his explanation settle, because it was easier than questioning it. I felt the air in the room get heavier, as if truth itself had weight. After dinner, my mother and I stood in the kitchen. She washed dishes while I dried. You shouldn't be so hard on him, she said gently. He's trying to grow the money. He's even looking at land near Lake Tahoma for your future. I stared at the reflection of the overhead light in the wet plates. For my future, I repeated. Or his portfolio. She frowned, turning off the water. Lena, he loves you. Everything he does is for the family. That word again. Family. It was supposed to mean safety, but in our house it meant hierarchy. You trust him with my college fund, I asked. She sighed. He knows what he's doing. He has contacts. You don't understand how investments work. I almost laughed. I had spent 3 years auditing corporate accounts, but somehow the man who bought a mower with scholarship money was the expert. Still, I swallowed the retort. Arguing with someone who has been gaslighted is like shouting through fog. They can hear you, but they cannot see what you see. I hugged her goodnight and left before I said something I would regret. The next day at work, I told Lucas about the dinner. He was the IT analyst who sat 2 cubicles away from me, the kind of friend who solved problems by asking better questions. You think he's laundering through the fund, he asked, lowering his voice. Maybe not laundering, I said, but definitely shifting money into his company. Lucas tapped his keyboard thoughtfully. Do you have proof? Not yet, I said, but I can get it. He looked up. Be careful. Recordings can get messy legally, but there's a way to do it right. If the call comes into you and you're part of the conversation, you can record it without consent in North Carolina. Just don't distribute it until the lawyer says it's admissible. I nodded slowly, the words settling in my mind like coordinates on a map. So inbound only. Exactly, he said. And keep logs. Date, time, context. It's about documentation, not drama. His tone reminded me why I liked him. Calm, technical, precise. Revenge through structure, not chaos. That evening, I sat in my apartment again, the glow of the monitor painting the room pale blue. I drafted a plan. It wasn't complicated document collect verify. I even made a folder labeled compliance. But I needed to keep up appearances. Martin thrived on the illusion of control. If he thought I was still playing the role of the obedient daughter, he would talk more. He always talked too much when he believed he had already won. A week later, I stopped by my mother's house with a small gift wrapped in brown paper. For you both, I said lightly. Martin tore the paper open, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Inside was a leather-bound notebook with gold lettering on the cover. House expenses ledger, it read. He raised an eyebrow. What's this? A little something to help you manage finances? I said with a straight face. I printed the first few pages myself. Columns for receipts, categories for deductions. You like being organized. He flipped it open and froze for half a second when he saw the embossed logo at the bottom of the first page, Internal Revenue Service. The green seal looked very official. I smiled. It's authentic design, I said. Makes it more professional. My mother laughed softly, not understanding the subtext, but Martin's smile tightened. Cute, he said. I'll use it. You should, I replied. Documentation builds trust. His expression flickered for a moment before smoothing back into charm. It was small, petty, maybe even childish, but it felt good. Humor could be a scalpel when words were useless. Later that night, as I drove home, the city lights stretched across the valley like small islands of warmth. I turned off the radio and thought about what Lucas had said. In toxic family systems, truth doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from evidence that cannot be argued with. I rolled the windows down the cool air brushing against my face. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. I whispered to myself, document, collect, verify. The words felt like prayer or maybe preparation. I didn't know if Martin would ever see justice. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The next time he underestimated me, the numbers would not be the only thing recording. The text came at 6:42 a.m. on a Thursday. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed with a message from the bank. The subject line was short, sharp, merciless. Remaining balance 0.00. For a moment I thought it was a mistake, maybe an alert for a different account. I opened the message, still half asleep, foam on my lips, and read the line again. The education fund had been drained, every cent. I froze, toothbrush in hand, the taste of mint suddenly bitter. Family betrayal never arrives with thunder. It comes as a quiet notification in a sanitized font. I called the bank. The automated voice greeted me cheerfully while I waited, staring at my reflection. The person who had been careful, the one who saved every email and printed every form, was gone. When the operator finally answered, her tone was polite, but distant. "Yes, Miss Hart, the transaction cleared last night. Full withdrawal via wire transfer to Keene Holdings, LLC. I swallowed hard. Can you reverse it?" "It appears authorized," she said, via electronic consent from a joint trustee. My stomach turned cold. My mother, she had signed something again, probably under pressure, maybe under lies. The operator asked if I wanted to file a dispute. I thanked her and hung up. For a few minutes, I stood there, letting the sound of the faucet fill the silence. The anger didn't come as shouting. It came as clarity. I opened my laptop, checked the document logs, and started noting every transfer. 3 in total. 1 for $420,000, 1 for $180,000, and 1 for $300,000. The math was clean. The theft was not. Later that morning, Martin texted me. "Don't panic," the message began, as if panic were a choice. Attached was a photo of a mortgage file. "We used part of the fund as collateral," he wrote, "to expand equity for the Lake Tahoma project. This benefits everyone." The image showed a neatly signed form, official and glossy. I saved it, then opened the file properties. The metadata told another story. Created with Snap Edit, last modified at 11:07 p.m. the night before. I laughed under my breath. The man who couldn't attach a PDF without my help had suddenly mastered digital document editing. That small discovery felt like air returning to my lungs. Proof didn't have to be loud, it just had to exist. Around noon, I realized I had thrown away something important. The envelope my grandfather had sealed years ago, the one labeled verification letter. I had opened it last month but kept it as a reminder. I tore through drawers, checked the table, nothing. My pulse quickened. I ran downstairs in slippers, out the building, the cold air slapping my face. The garbage truck was already turning the corner. I waved frantically, shouting for them to stop. The driver slowed, confused. "Please," I gasped. I threw out the wrong envelope. He nodded and pointed to the back. I climbed up, ignoring the smell, and dug through the bag from my floor. My fingers brushed something stiff, a beige envelope, edges crumpled but still sealed. I held it to my chest, breathing hard. The driver smiled faintly. "Got it?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, half laughing, half shaking. "Got it." Back in my apartment, I opened the letter carefully. My grandfather's handwriting was faint but steady. "Lena," it read. "Verify every signature, even mine. Love protects, but proof preserves." My eyes stung. He must have known how easily trust could be twisted into a weapon. I placed the letter beside my laptop and stared at the screen. The balance still said 0. The account that had once carried his legacy now read like a confession. I made coffee strong and bitter and started a new spreadsheet. Across the top, I typed fraudtimeline.xlsx. The name looked almost absurd on the screen, but the structure soothed me. Column A, date. Column B, transaction. Column C, signature authority. Column D, proof source. I filled what I could remember, cross-referencing emails, texts, call logs. By evening, I had 3 pages of patterns. Martin's withdrawals matched specific dates when my mother had medical appointments or club events, times when she would have signed anything just to get him off her back. It was methodical. He wasn't sloppy. He was strategic. My apartment felt smaller that night. I turned on Alexa for background noise, but the silence between her sentences was heavier than usual. I spoke without thinking. Alexa reminded me every morning to document. She beeped in acknowledgement. "What would you like me to say?" I hesitated, then smiled bitterly. "Every lie needs a receipt." The device chirped, "Okay, I will remind you." It was absurd, almost comical, but hearing it aloud gave the words power. A small act of revenge disguised as routine. Humor had become my armor logic, my weapon. I spent the next few hours tracing the bank's public API feed for verification timestamps. The activity log confirmed 3 sessions initiated under my mother's access ID. Each one originated from the same IP address, Martin's office. I saved screenshots, marked them with timestamps, and stored them in an encrypted folder. The work was tedious, mechanical, but comforting. Each entry felt like rebuilding a piece of the wall he had knocked down. By midnight, the adrenaline began to fade. I sat by the window, staring at the faint glow of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Somewhere out there, my mother probably believed the money was still safe. She trusted him because trusting him cost less energy than confronting him. I couldn't blame her. People in toxic families learn to survive by choosing peace over truth, but peace built on deceit is only silence waiting to collapse. I read the letter again before bed, the one that smelled faintly of cedar from the old desk drawer. Verify every signature. It sounded like legal advice, but it felt like a moral code. My grandfather had built his career as a surgeon, steady hands and steady judgment. He had always told me that the human heart lies, but handwriting does not. I ran my finger over his signature. The ink bled slightly where he must have pressed too hard. Proof of intent. Proof of love. As the night deepened, I thought of Martin's confident messages, his edited documents, his practiced charm. He believed he had written the final chapter. He had no idea I had just opened the first page of an audit that would unravel his entire design. I didn't need to yell or threaten. I needed only to count. Numbers do not care about ego. They remember. Before sleeping, I checked the balance one last time, not because I expected change, but because I wanted to see the zero again. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was evidence. The start of conflict justice disguised as loss. I whispered to the dark, "Every lie needs a receipt," and Alexa echoed it softly back, a strange lullaby for the betrayed. The next morning, I sat in the waiting room of attorney Elaine Corr's office, my backpack heavy with files, receipts, and a worn envelope labeled verification letter. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Elaine had been my grandfather's estate lawyer, a woman who never smiled out of politeness, only out of precision. When she stepped out of her office, she held a folder already marked with my name. "Miss Hart," she said, "you said it concerns your education trust." I nodded. "I think it's been violated." She gestured for me to follow. The office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. I spread the documents on her desk, the bank statements, the transaction screenshots, the mortgage photo Martin had doctored, and the letter from my grandfather. Elaine scanned them in silence, her expression tightening as she turned each page. "You're certain these transfers were not authorized for education purposes?" "Positive," I said. "I never received $1 from that fund. He told my mother he was reinvesting." She tapped the words on the original trust letter, her manicured nails clicking softly. "This line, educational disbursement only, is legally binding. If funds were used otherwise, it's breach of fiduciary duty." She looked up at me. "And you're the named beneficiary." "Yes," I said quietly. "Then we have grounds," she replied. Elaine's assistant entered with coffee and a small notepad. "I'll need the exact wire amounts," she said. I handed her the spreadsheet I had made. 3 transfers, I said, pointing. 420,000, 180,000, and 300,000. She wrote them down neatly, the numbers anchoring themselves to paper like evidence carved into stone. Elaine adjusted her glasses. "That totals 900,000. "What about the rest fees?" I said bitterly. "And the rest is probably in his mortgage under Keene Holdings." She nodded slowly. "I'll subpoena the records once we verify the signature trail." Her tone carried no emotion, but there was a quiet strength behind it that made me feel less alone. As I gathered the papers, she stopped me. "Miss Hart, you mentioned you had some recordings." "Not yet," I said, "but I know how to get them." "Be cautious," she warned. "One-party consent applies here, but manipulation or baiting could weaken admissibility." I smiled faintly. "I'm not baiting. I'm documenting." She raised an eyebrow, then smiled slightly. "Good answer." That evening, my mother called. Her voice was soft, trembling. "Lena, why did you see Elaine Martin's upset?" I closed my eyes. "Because it's my fund, Mom, my education, my name." She sighed. "He says it's just a management transfer, nothing permanent." In the background, I heard Martin's voice, muffled but sharp. "Tell her to stop snooping." My mother whispered, "He's doing this for you." I wanted to shout, but kept my voice level. "Mom, just don't sign anything else. Promise me." She hesitated, then said quietly, "He said I could lose the house if I don't." My throat tightened. "Then lose the house, not your dignity." I ended the call and set the phone down gently. Later that night, I opened my call log and set the phone to auto-record inbound calls. At 7:42 p.m., the first one came. My mother, again, voice shaking. "He wants to talk to you." I heard rustling, then Martin's voice took over, loud and confident. "Lena, you're overreacting. This is temporary. Just sign the consent for fund management transfer. I'll handle the returns." I stayed silent for a beat, heart pounding. "Martin, you already handled $900,000, I said. "How much return are you expecting before it turns into theft?" He laughed short and dismissive. "Big words. Just sign. It's not permanent." My mother's voice trembled in the background. "Just sign it, honey. It's safer this way. Safer for who I asked softly." He didn't answer. The recording ended when he hung up. I saved it twice, once in the cloud, once on a flash drive labeled receipts. Revenge emotional didn't always mean rage. Sometimes it meant evidence spoken in calm voices. I printed the transcript of the call, each word like a small knife. The printer whirred, then coughed. Halfway through the page, the ink smeared and stopped. The warning light blinked low toner. I muttered under my breath and shook the cartridge, but it was dry. The timing felt almost comic. I grabbed my keys and ran to my car. Staples closed at 9. It was 8:57. I made it to the store in sandals and a hoodie, breathless, the clerk watching as I grabbed the last black ink cartridge on the shelf. "Emergency project," he asked. "Something like that," I said. At the register, the total flashed $64.99. I paid in cash, smiling at the irony that justice always seemed to have small transaction fees. Back home, the fresh cartridge clicked into place. The printer roared back to life, spitting out the final page. The last line printed cleanly, "Sign it." Just a temporary transfer. I stared at those words until the ink dried. Proof has a sound, I thought. It sounds like paper feeding through a printer after running out of excuses. When the copies were done, I stacked them neatly, labeled them with sticky notes, and slid them into a folder marked "Smoking Gun." The name was childish but satisfying. I wanted something that would make me laugh when fear tried to creep in. Humor was oxygen in a room full of deceit. I turned on my laptop, attached the files to an email, and typed the recipient line myself and Elaine. In the subject field, I wrote "Annual Donation Summary." It was almost poetic. If Martin snooped through my emails again, he would think it was a charitable report. The irony made me grin. He had always claimed the fund was an investment in the family. Tonight it finally was just not in the way he imagined. I hit send and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. A soft ping confirmed delivery. It felt like an exhale. I wasn't angry anymore. I was operational. Every small step, the ink cartridge, the subject line, the recording, was a piece of structure forming under the chaos. Revenge was not loud. It was clerical. At midnight, I made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the city lights flickered like watchful eyes. Somewhere in the house on Lake Tahoma, Martin probably poured another glass of wine, believing everything was still under control. He had no idea the audit had already begun. My grandfather used to say medicine wasn't about healing the sick, but exposing the cause. I smiled faintly. This was the same. The sickness was greed. The cure was documentation. And tomorrow I would start writing the prescription. The next week began quietly, almost deceptively so. I kept my head down at work, processed invoices, joined meetings, answered emails. No one could tell that between spreadsheets and lunch breaks, I was building a case. Lucas stopped by my desk one afternoon holding a flash drive between two fingers, like a surgeon handling a delicate instrument. "Recovered it," he said. "Took a while, but the audio's clean." I looked at him, heart-catching in my throat. "You're sure?" He nodded. "File name's voice, 2023 WAN 15M4A. It was hidden in the backup partition of your mom's old shared drive." He hesitated. "You might want to listen somewhere private." I took it from him, carefully feeling its weight. Tiny silver innocent, yet somewhere inside it was truth captured in digital form. After work, I drove to Trader Joe's telling myself I needed groceries. It was an excuse to keep moving to act normal. My phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. "Play it. You'll want to hear this." I opened my email, downloaded the attachment, and pressed play. Martin's voice filled my earbuds so familiar it made my stomach twist. "The girl won't know," he said, laughing. "College fund's better in my house. At least I'll make something of it." A second male voice chuckled. "Maybe a friend, maybe a contractor." "You sure she won't notice?" "She's naive," Martin replied. Numbers bore her. The recording ended with the sound of clinking glasses. I froze in the middle of the snack aisle. My fingers went slack, knocking over an entire tray of croissants. The golden pastries tumbled to the floor in slow motion, scattering crumbs across my shoes. A young employee rushed over wide-eyed. "Oh no, are you okay?" I blinked, half laughing, half on the verge of tears. "Yeah," I said softly. "Justice crumbles sometimes." He grinned, helping me pick up the mess. I left the store without buying anything, clutching the flash drive like a talisman. At home, I replayed the file again, this time through my laptop speakers. The audio was clearer than I expected. Martin's voice carried that smug rhythm I knew too well, every word dripping with entitlement. I saved 3 versions, one in the cloud, one on a password-protected drive, and one on a physical USB I kept in my desk drawer. I labeled it Exhibit A. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. Over the weekend, I assembled what Elaine called a proof kit. I printed notarized copies of the trust charter, the transaction statements, and the metadata screenshots from the fake mortgage document. Each piece went into a plastic sleeve color-coded by relevance. The USB drive sat in the center, gleaming under the desk lamp like a silver bullet. I even made a timeline chart that stretched across my wall, each date pinned with red string connecting events, transfers, and phone calls. It looked obsessive, but I didn't care. Revenge in numbers was still revenge. On Sunday morning, I stopped by my mother's house with coffee and a framed picture. "For you both," I said lightly as Martin opened the door. He gave me a suspicious smile. "You're getting generous these days." I shrugged. "I'm learning to give credit where it's due." He peeled back the paper wrapping, revealing a polished wooden frame with a simple white print inside. The quote was centered, written in black serif font trust, but verify, underneath my grandfather's signature. Martin's smile faltered for just a second. "Nice," he said finally. "Old-fashioned wisdom." I nodded. He believed in proof. My mother beamed, oblivious to the tension. "That's lovely, Lena. It'll look perfect in the living room." Martin hung it near the mantel, unaware that the line itself was a silent accusation. Every time he'd glance at it, the words would whisper the truth. He pretended not to know. That was my mini revenge, small and surgical. Later that evening, I sat at my desk labeling evidence folders, methodically reviewing each timestamp. The process was tedious but calming. I created a master document titled Case Notes Conflict Justice. Each section detailed financial activity, audio proof, and witness accounts. Under notes for the recording, I wrote tone confident mocking, intent explicit misappropriation. I wanted every word to sound as cold as the numbers he had manipulated. Around midnight, I messaged Lucas. "Do you think this will hold in court?" He replied a few minutes later. "It's not about holding. It's about showing who he really is. Once it's out, he can't spin it anymore." I stared at his words. The thought of public exposure made my stomach twist, but beneath that anxiety was something steadier, satisfaction. Truth once captured doesn't unrecord itself. I printed the final page of the financial ledger, the one summarizing total losses and projected restitution. The printer hummed quietly, as if tired from all the secrets it had printed lately. When it finished, I placed the last page on top of the pile and tied everything together with a red ribbon. It felt ceremonial, the quiet before a storm. I caught my reflection in the window, pale in the lamplight, tired but sharper somehow. My grandfather's photo sat beside the stack of papers. I whispered to it, "You were right." I imagined him nodding slightly as if approving my calm defiance. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like an auditor with a moral ledger to balance. The next morning, I emailed Elaine with the subject, Hart Fund Documentation Preliminary Proof Set. Attached were the scanned pages and a note audio evidence available on request. Additional files secured. She replied within minutes, "Excellent. Prepare for possible injunction hearing." My pulse quickened. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. That night, I visited my mother again. The framed quote hung above the fireplace, illuminated by soft light. Martin poured himself wine and glanced at it briefly, smirking. "Your grandfather was a wise man," he said. "He was," I replied. "He believed trust was earned, not inherited." He lifted his glass lazily. "Then I hope you earn it someday." "Oh," I said, smiling thinly, "I already did." When I left, I looked back one last time at the quote on the wall. It glowed faintly under the lamplight. Trust, but verify. It wasn't just advice anymore. It was prophecy. The kind that ends not in forgiveness, but in exposure. The invitation came in a group text written by my mother, but clearly dictated by Martin. Housewarming dinner at our new home on the French Broad River. Formal attire. Family only. The words "our new home" sat heavy on the screen. I read it twice before replying with a simple, "I'll be there." Elaine told me not to engage emotionally until the hearing, but this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about observation. Revenge story money always begins in silence. The house glowed like a magazine spread when I arrived. Strings of golden lights ran across the porch railings, reflecting on the water below. Guests mingled on the lawn, wine glasses in hand, their laughter drifting across the cool air. Martin greeted everyone like a celebrity, his arm around my mother, his voice loud enough to claim ownership of the night. When he saw me, he smiled that politician's smile. "Lena," he said, "you made it. Welcome to the investment you helped build." The sentence was bait. I took it quietly, walking inside. The living room smelled of new wood and arrogance. The Wi-Fi network popped up on my phone. King Keen. Password hint, grow up 27. I almost laughed. The man never missed a chance to brand his ego. "Nice password," I said casually. "Motivational." He grinned. "Keeps freeloaders out. And humility, too, I guess." He didn't catch it. The table was long and gleaming, set with crystal glasses and overpriced wine. Martin tapped his glass for attention. "Before we eat," he began, "I'd like to say something about hard work and foresight." He gestured toward the windows overlooking the river. "This house isn't just a home. It's proof that with vision and a little courage, you can build something real." He looked directly at me, smile sharpening. "Some people chase degrees. I chase results." A few guests laughed softly, unsure if it was a joke. My mother glanced at me, nervous, but said nothing. I folded my napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's definitely real." He took that as agreement and kept talking. "Lena's always been bright," he continued, "but books and theories don't buy property. Real work does. I used her college fund for something meaningful." The room went quiet. Someone coughed. I heard the river outside, steady and cold. He took a sip of wine, savoring the silence he had created. "You'll never be a doctor, Lena," he said finally. "But look around. This is what real success looks like." My mother's fork clinked against her plate. "Martin," she whispered. He ignored her. My pulse was steady, not fast. I reached into my bag and took out the small silver USB, the same one that held his voice bragging about theft. I set it on the table just beside the wine bottle. The metal caught the candlelight gleaming softly. "Real," I said quietly. "Let's see how real it sounds on playback." The room froze. I didn't press play. I didn't have to. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable electric. FOMO in human form. Martin's eyes darted between the drive and my face. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, laughing weakly. I smiled. "You'll find out soon enough." I tucked it back into my bag and lifted my glass. "To investments," I said, clinking mine against his untouched one. He tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "Still dramatic, aren't you?" "Only when it's earned," I said. He turned to the guests, eager to steer the conversation back to his narrative. "Anyway, let's not spoil the night. Dinner's served." The servers brought out roasted salmon, truffle potatoes, and an expensive red wine he had bragged about online as his points purchase. The very same bottle I remembered that he had paid for using the education fund card months ago. I smiled inwardly. The setup for my small act of poetic accounting had arrived. When he poured himself another glass, I reached into my tote and pulled out a matching bottle. Same label, same vintage. I brought something I said sweetly. "A gift for the man who loves returns." He chuckled. "Well, I do appreciate fine taste." "Oh, it's the same one you got with your reward points," I said lightly, "but I found mine on clearance." He blinked, confused. I handed it to him with a small white envelope. Receipts inside. He opened it. A $10 Trader Joe's gift card slid out. "It's prepaid," I said with a smile. "You can reinvest it." The table broke into hesitant laughter. My mother hid a nervous smile behind her napkin. Martin's jaw tightened, but he forced out a laugh. "Clever," he said. "You always did have a sense of humor." "Inherited," I replied, "from someone who believed in accounting." The rest of the evening played like theater. He entertained the guests with stories about the house, pretending not to feel the weight of the USB still in my bag. Every time he said investment or equity, I thought of the voice recording waiting in silence, the words he'd never unsay. Betrayal, family karma always arrives in the language of irony. The man who mocked education was about to be educated in consequences. After dinner, as guests moved toward the patio for dessert, he leaned closer to me. "Whatever you think you have, it won't hold up. You have nothing." His breath smelled faintly of expensive wine and fear. I met his eyes, calm and deliberate. "You're right," I said softly. "I have nothing. Just numbers, signatures, and your own voice." I let that hang between us. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're bluffing." "Then sleep easy," I said, picking up my bag. "I'll see you in court." I stepped outside onto the deck, the night air cool against my skin. The French Broad River shimmered under the moonlight, quiet and unbothered. Inside, laughter tried to resume, but it sounded forced, now brittle at the edges. My mother joined me a few minutes later, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lena, what did you mean back there?" I looked at her, seeing both guilt and love tangled in her eyes. "Mom," I said gently, "truth doesn't need explaining. It needs timing." She nodded, tears glistening. "He said he was doing it for us." I took her hand. "Then he'll have a chance to explain that too." We stood together in silence, watching the river move steadily forward, unstoppable. Inside, Martin laughed too loudly at something a guest said, but for the first time, it sounded hollow. The kind of laughter people use when they're trying to outrun the echo of their own mistakes. I walked back through the dining room, pausing beside the frame that hung near the fireplace. Trust, but verify. The words glowed softly in the light. I turned to him one last time. "Beautiful house," I said. "I hope the foundation's as solid as the paperwork." His smirk faltered just for a second. That was enough. When I drove away, the lights of the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed with a new message from Elaine Court. Date confirmed. Monday. Bring everything. I smiled to myself. The confrontation was done. The exposure was coming. Martin thought the dinner was his victory lap. He didn't realize it was just the sound check before the main event. The courthouse on March 6th felt colder than I expected. Morning light cut across the marble floors, washing everything in sterile brightness. I stood beside Elaine, holding the folder of evidence I had memorized by heart. The engraved plaque outside the courtroom read Judge Harold Price, a man known for disliking theatrics. That comforted me. I wanted quiet justice, not spectacle. Inside, Martin sat beside his attorney, wearing a navy suit and a forced calm. My mother sat behind him, her hands clasped tightly together. When she looked at me, I saw guilt, fear, and maybe a faint trace of hope. The clerk called our case number. Elaine rose smoothly. Your Honor, this case concerns the unauthorized transfer and misappropriation of a restricted educational fund established under the Hart Trust. Her voice was steady, precise. Martin's lawyer, a man named Crowley, smirked. We intend to prove this was a legitimate reallocation within family assets. Judge Price adjusted his glasses. Reallocation, he repeated dryly. We will see. He gestured to Elaine. Proceed with your evidence. Elaine nodded to me. I reached into my bag and handed her the silver USB, the same one I had placed on the dinner table a week earlier. It gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights. She connected it to the courtroom monitor, and for a moment the only sound was the faint hum of the speakers. Then Martin's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. The girl won't know, he said on the recording. College funds better in my house. His laugh echoed through the chamber. There was a ripple of movement among the spectators. Crowley shifted uncomfortably. Martin's face went pale. Elaine pressed play again, this time a second file. My mother's voice trembling. Martin, she said no. His reply followed sharp and impatient. Sign it. It's just temporary. She's not using it anyway. He laughed again. She'll never see it coming. The silence afterward was so thick it almost had texture. Then, in a perfectly timed stroke of absurdity, Crowley's cell phone went off in his briefcase. The ringtone blared through the courtroom, bright and loud, money, money, money. The irony landed like a punchline written by the universe itself. The entire room froze. A woman in the back stifled a laugh. The judge exhaled slowly. Mr. Crowley, he said, I trust your ringtone was not intentional. Crowley fumbled for the phone, face flushed crimson. My apologies, Your Honor. Even Elaine couldn't suppress a brief smirk before she composed herself again. Timing is everything, she murmured under her breath. Judge Price turned back to Martin. Mr. Keene, is that you on the recording? Martin swallowed hard. It's out of context, he said. I was joking. You can't take it literally. You said you transferred educational funds into your own mortgage, the judge said flatly. Do you often joke about federal wire fraud? Martin opened his mouth, but no sound came. Elaine gestured toward Lucas, seated quietly near the witness stand. Your Honor, we'd like to call Mr. Lucas Daniels, IT specialist, as an affiant to authenticate the recording and metadata. Lucas stood dressed neatly in a gray suit. He walked with the kind of composure that only came from knowing exactly what he was about to say. After being sworn in, he connected his laptop to the monitor. This file was recovered from a shared cloud backup associated with Mrs. Diana Keene's account, he began. The metadata indicates it was created on January 15, 2023, using a Samsung Galaxy Note registered to Martin Keene. No modifications were detected. He clicked through the verification software, each timestamp glowing in sequence. Integrity confirmed. No edits. No compression artifacts. He looked up at the judge. It's authentic. Judge Price leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Mr. Keene, your attorney, claimed this was reallocation. Would you like to explain how that aligns with you coercing your spouse to sign documents you yourself described as temporary? Martin stammered. I was trying to protect our finances. The market was unstable. It was all meant to be paid back. With whose permission, the judge asked. Yours. He tapped his pen lightly. Because it appears you treated your stepdaughter's trust as a personal loan. My mother began to cry quietly. Martin turned toward her, reaching for her hand, but she flinched away. Elaine rose again. Your Honor, in addition to the audio, we have notarized documents showing the original terms of the trust, which explicitly limit disbursement to educational purposes. We also have transaction records of the 3 wire transfers totaling $900,000. She handed the binder to the clerk, who placed it before the judge. He skimmed the first few pages, then looked up. This is thorough work, Ms. Kaur. I see timestamp signature comparisons, even property appraisals tied to the mortgage account. You have done your homework. Elaine inclined her head. Thank you, Your Honor. And Ms. Hart, he said, glancing at me, I commend your composure. Few beneficiaries come this prepared. I nodded silently, heart pounding. The tension in the room felt both unbearable and addictive. Crowley rose desperate to regain ground. Your Honor, we question the legality of the recording. There may be privacy implications. Elaine didn't miss a beat. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. My client was that party. Judge Price nodded. Overruled. Continue. Crowley sat down heavily. The defeat on his face was almost comical. Elaine handed the USB to the clerk for official record. We also submit the recovery affidavit verifying digital chain of custody. Lucas signed the form, each pen stroke deliberate. The judge reviewed it, then set it aside. The court will enter this as Exhibit B. He turned to Martin again. You said this was temporary. How long was temporary supposed to last? Martin's silence answered for him. Judge Price leaned forward, voice measured. This court cannot yet rule on full restitution without further audit, but the evidence presented today shows sufficient cause to freeze all assets associated with the misappropriated funds. Martin's head snapped up. You can't do that. That money's in property. It's liquid. Then you should have thought of that before transferring educational assets into personal accounts, the judge replied coolly. He struck his gavel once. All accounts and assets held under Keene Holdings, LLC, are hereby frozen pending further investigation. The defendant is ordered to surrender all digital devices and documentation related to these transactions within 72 hours. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Crowley leaned toward Martin, whispering frantically. Martin's face turned the color of chalk. My mother buried her face in her hands. Elaine touched my arm lightly. That's a temporary ruling, she whispered, but it's the beginning. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Revenge emotional doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet click of a gavel echoing through a room where truth finally catches up. As we left the courtroom, reporters waited by the steps. The story had already spread. Local businessmen accused of misusing stepdaughter's education trust. Cameras flashed. Someone called my name, but I didn't stop. Elaine shielded me with her folder, guiding me toward the car. Don't speak to the press, she said. Not yet. I nodded. Behind me, I heard Martin arguing with Crowley, his voice cracking. They can't take everything. They can? Crowley muttered. And they just did. When we reached the car, Elaine turned to me. You did well. It's not over, I said. No, she agreed, but now he's the one running out of ink. I smiled faintly. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same printer that had once jammed on me had printed his undoing. The courthouse bell struck noon. I looked back one last time at the marble steps, the sun reflecting off their polished surface. It wasn't victory yet, but it was proof. The kind of proof you could hear time-stamped, authenticated, undeniable. 2 weeks after the hearing, the first headline appeared on the Asheville Chronicle website. Businessman tied to education fund scandal. The article featured a photo of Martin standing on his porch, wearing his favorite navy blazer eyes, half closed in the flash. The caption read, Local entrepreneur under investigation for alleged misappropriation of family trust funds. It spread fast. Neighbors whispered in grocery aisles and co-workers at my firm passed around the link, quietly pretending not to look at me when I walked by. Revenge inheritance drama family always begins when private arrogance meets public light. The consequences came in waves. The mortgage lender issued a foreclosure notice demanding immediate repayment after the court froze his accounts. The credit cards followed next, each letter more brutal than the last accounts: suspended balances, due rewards, forfeited. Martin's empire, built on appearances, began to crumble line by line. The court ordered restitution of $1.2 million, plus legal fees and 8% interest. Elaine sent me the formal judgment with a single line typed beneath her signature: "Justice accrues interest too." My mother called every night that week, her voice softer each time. "They're saying we could lose the house," she whispered one evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by folders, sipping cold tea. "You won't lose it, Mom," I said. "He will." She hesitated. "He's been so angry lately. He says you humiliated him." I closed my laptop slowly. I didn't humiliate him. The evidence did. There was silence, then a sound like a small sob. "I didn't know he was using your fund, I swear, Lena. He said it was just moved around temporarily." My throat tightened. "I know, Mom. You trusted him. He made sure of that." She whispered, "He took my cards. Said I couldn't handle money." My stomach clenched. He gives me $50 a week for groceries. Says budgeting keeps me disciplined." I stared at the ceiling, rage building, but cold measured. "That's not discipline. That's control." The next morning, she showed up at my apartment with a brown paper bag of bills and old receipts. "I found these in his office," she said quietly. "He's been withdrawing cash under my name." I went through them, scanning amounts, dates, withdrawals. It was a map of manipulation. "Mom," I said gently, "we'll fix this. But you have to stop protecting him." She nodded, tears welling. I think I just didn't want to believe I made the same mistake twice. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered without thinking. Lena Martin's voice came through, low and strained. "We need to talk." About what I asked, though I already knew. The recording, he said. "Delete it. I'll transfer everything back, the full amount." I almost laughed. "Transfer it to the court," I said calmly. "They handle restitution now. You don't have to do this," he pleaded. "We're family." "No," I said quietly. "You made sure we stopped being that the moment you forged my signature." There was a long pause. "You think this makes you righteous?" he snapped finally. "You destroyed your mother's marriage." "No," I replied. "You destroyed her trust. I just showed the receipt." Then I hung up. The following day, he tried a different tactic. A hand-delivered envelope appeared on my doorstep containing a typed letter. He offered to sign over the remaining property shares if I would issue a written statement calling the case a misunderstanding. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it back into the envelope, and forwarded it to Elaine. She emailed back 3 words: "Evidence of coercion." The fallout grew louder. The Homeowners Association sent a fine notice for overgrown grass, $1,200. The irony was impossible to miss. Martin had once bragged about buying an $8,700 lawnmower to keep the property immaculate. Now the mower sat unused, its tires flat while the yard grew wild around it. My mother told me the neighbors complained about the noise of him shouting on phone calls late into the night. He was unraveling in slow motion, and the universe seemed determined to make the details poetic. Meanwhile, my mother began untangling herself from his financial web. We spent an evening at my kitchen counter going through her accounts, freezing joint cards, changing passwords, opening a new debit account under her name alone. She looked so small sitting there, shoulders hunched, glasses slipping down her nose. "I don't even know where to start," she said quietly. "Start here," I said, sliding a slim folder toward her. The cover read, "Financial Safety 101. I had made it myself the night before, step-by-step guides, hotline numbers, credit freeze instructions." Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "You made this. You taught me to be thorough," I said. She laughed softly through tears. "You really are your grandfather's granddaughter." I smiled. "I just wish you'd had someone like him looking out for you." I handed her a new debit card with her name embossed across it. This one's yours. No one else gets to touch it." She held it like it was something sacred. "Thank you," she whispered. I forgot what it felt like to have control. That was my mini revenge, quiet but deep. Taking back her freedom was more satisfying than any headline. A few days later, the local news ran a follow-up story. Reports confirm Education Trust fully recovered. They quoted Elaine briefly, calling it a notable example of documentation as self-defense. Martin refused interviews. Crowley withdrew from representation after unpaid fees. My mother moved into the guest room, keeping her distance as the investigation widened. When she called that night, her voice was steadier. "He says the lawnmower's broken," she said with a small laugh. "Good," I replied. "Maybe the grass will cover the shame." She laughed harder this time. It was the first real laughter I had heard from her in months. The court sent the restitution confirmation a week later. A digital copy of the payment schedule appeared in my inbox. $1.2 million in restitution paid through liquidation of Martin's assets and property. There was no satisfaction in the number itself, just in what it represented: boundaries, restored lessons, documented. I forwarded it to Elaine and then to Lucas with a short message. "It's done." Lucas replied instantly. The system finally did something right. I wrote back, "Maybe, because it had evidence this time." That evening, I sat on my balcony with my laptop open, looking over the city lights. I could see reflections in the river, slow and peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt still. Revenge doesn't always roar or destroy. Sometimes it dismantles quietly, one ledger at a time, until all that remains is balance. Across town, Martin's house sat in foreclosure, his empire of appearances reduced to listings, liens, and locked gates. People who once called him a visionary now called him reckless. The irony was that he had always called my education fund a waste. Now it was the only reason his actions were documented with precision. His downfall had been itemized, time-stamped, and notarized. As I closed my laptop, a text from my mother appeared. "Thank you for teaching me how to stand again." I smiled, typing back, "You already knew how. You just needed a new foundation." The wind from the river carried a faint chill. I wrapped my cardigan tighter, feeling both tired and alive. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting. I was rebuilding. By late autumn, the last phase of the case felt almost quiet. The headlines had faded, the legal noise dulled into paperwork and audits. The court officially validated the recordings as admissible evidence, citing their unbroken chain of custody and clear intent. It was written in the ruling, "The Hart Education Trust recordings meet all requirements for authenticity and relevance." The sentence looked cold and bureaucratic, yet it felt strangely poetic. Revenge emotional didn't always come in flames. Sometimes it came in the form of well-worded paragraphs and verified timestamps. Keene Holdings, once the pride of Martin's bragging rights, was now under full federal audit. The IRS sent notices about discrepancies across 6 years of filings. His lawyer had quit months ago. Every letter he opened seemed to subtract something from his sense of invincibility. Story financial consequences move slowly but thoroughly. The first time I saw him again was outside the courthouse parking lot in November. The air was sharp with the smell of wet leaves. I had just finished signing the restitution receipt confirming the recovery and damages. He stood near the curb arguing with a tow truck driver. His car, a sleek black sedan he once called his reward for discipline, was being hitched to the back of a tow truck. The driver, a grizzled man in a reflective vest, looked unimpressed by the shouting. "You the fun guy?" he asked casually as Martin waved his hands in protest. I nearly choked on my coffee. Martin froze, realizing how small that label had become. "That's defamation," he muttered. The driver laughed. "No, that's repossession. It was absurd and perfect all at once." I walked past without saying a word. He didn't notice me until I was almost at my car. His voice followed softer, stripped of command. "Lena," he called. I turned slightly. He looked older, smaller. "You win," he said simply. I met his gaze for a second, then replied, It wasn't a game. He nodded once and looked away. The next morning, the restitution payment arrived in my account. The balance blinked on the screen. Surreal and quiet, $1,200,043. I stared at it for a long time, not because of greed, but because of what it represented: restored order, reclaimed voice proof that documentation could defend dignity. I transferred 10% into a new account labeled Hart Legacy Scholarship. The name felt right. My grandfather's handwriting framed on my desk seemed to approve silently. The scholarship would fund medical students from disadvantaged families. I wanted the money to keep doing what it was meant to do: build futures, not buy illusions. Elaine sent a congratulatory message that afternoon. "The court's closed this file," she wrote. "Full restitution confirmed. The audit is ongoing, but you're free." I replied with 2 words: "Thank you." She answered, "Keep your receipts." It made me smile. I spent that evening reorganizing my home office. The files that once filled the shelves, bank statements, transcripts, legal briefs, were neatly boxed and labeled archived. I placed them in the closet and replaced the space on my desk with something new, a single manila folder containing the scholarship documents. Starting fresh felt lighter than I expected. The same desk that had once held evidence now held possibility. Around dinner time, I wrote a note, sealed it in an ivory envelope, and addressed it to Martin's old business office. It was simple, polite, and sharp enough to leave a mark. "Thank you for proving the need for financial literacy." I signed it, Lena Hart. Mini revenge number 8 wasn't cruel. It was educational. My mother visited that weekend with homemade soup and her usual nervous energy. "How does it feel?" she asked, setting the pot on the stove. "To finally be done." I leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise. Strange, I admitted. Peaceful, but strange. She nodded slowly. "He got a job offer," she said quietly. "Community service supervisor for a financial literacy program." I almost laughed. Poetic irony at its finest. She smiled faintly. "He said they're making him teach budgeting classes." "That's the universe," I said, always finding symmetry. She stirred the soup, thoughtful. "I'm moving next month," she added. "Smaller place closer to downtown. I want to start cooking classes for single mothers." I smiled. "Grandpa would love that." He'd say it's about time, she replied, and for the first time her laughter sounded completely free. Later that night, I sat by my window with my laptop open, finalizing the scholarship website. The tagline read, "Trust, but verify. Education is legacy." I reread the words again and again, feeling them settle into something solid. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the wet streets. Somewhere out there, Martin was probably filling out financial disclosure forms for his audit calculating losses he once thought were victories. I didn't wish him harm. I just wished him clarity, the kind you only earn when the numbers finally balance against the truth. Before bed, I opened my grandfather's old ledger, the one he had used to track his first clients. On the inside cover in faded ink, he had written, "Account for what you owe, not for what you fear." I traced the letters with my fingertip and smiled. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction. A week later, I received the first thank you letter from a scholarship recipient. A young woman named Clara wrote that she had almost dropped out of nursing school because her father lost his job. "Your scholarship saved me," she wrote. "I promise to pay it forward." I folded the letter and placed it beside the ledger. Some debts, I realized, are meant to be repaid in kindness. As winter settled in, I visited my mother's new apartment. The walls were still bare, but the air smelled of tomato soup and fresh bread. She had pinned a small card near the door. "Budget equals freedom." "You made that?" I asked. "Lucas printed it for me," she said proudly. I laughed. "Looks like you have allies now." "So do you," she replied, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. "You built something good, Lena, something lasting." I looked out the window at the quiet street where the lights reflected softly on the wet pavement. The world felt different, smaller, maybe, but clearer. Revenge wasn't destruction. It was redirection. It took what was stolen and put it back where it belonged, In that moment, peace didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like completion. By the time spring came, the case was no longer front-page news. The city had moved on to fresher scandals, but for me, the echoes still lingered in the quiet. One afternoon, an envelope arrived without a return address. The handwriting was unmistakably his precise slanted proud, even when broken. Inside was a letter written on plain white paper. "Lena," it began, "I know you think I was stealing. I wasn't. I was protecting family assets. I thought I could make it grow. I thought I was being smart for all of us. I see now how it looked and how it hurt you. I am asking for your help, appealing the restrictions. You understand the system. You could write something, anything, for your mother's sake." I read the lines twice, then folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Betrayal, family karma, always arrives dressed as repentance. The tone was soft, but the motive was the same control repackaged as concern. I stared at the page for a while, then picked up a pen and wrote 3 words on the back. Protection does not hide. I placed it in a new envelope and mailed it back without a note. Some replies don't need explanation. A week later, my mother called hesitant. "He's been asking around," she said. "Told Pastor Reed you're holding a grudge." I almost laughed. "He sent me a letter asking me to help with his appeal." "Did you?" she asked carefully. "No," I said simply. "He protected himself long enough." She sighed. "He's even asked the pastor to speak with you." "Then I guess the pastor will call," I said. 2 days later, Pastor Reed did. His voice was warm, steady, seasoned by years of patience. "Lena, I got a call from Martin," he began gently. "He asked if I could reach out. He says he wants forgiveness." I exhaled slowly. "Forgiveness isn't the same as reversal," I said. There was a pause. Then the pastor chuckled softly. "He also asked if I could help him get your support letter." I smiled faintly. "What did you tell him I told him? Confession comes before petition," the pastor said, and he hung up. We both laughed quietly. The humor was necessary. Without it, justice would feel too heavy. A month later, the final sentencing order arrived. The court denied his appeal. Martin was given a suspended sentence with probation community service and a civil fine for unauthorized fund management. He was barred from overseeing or holding fiduciary authority over any dependent's assets for 10 years. The legal phrasing was dry but devastating to him. It stripped him of the very image he had built protector-provider patriarch. Conflict justice always cuts at identity before comfort. The local paper ran a small follow-up former businessman assigned to community service program focused on financial literacy. The irony did not escape anyone who had followed the case. My mother texted me a screenshot with a simple line, "He's finally teaching what he refused to learn." I replied with a heart emoji and nothing more. There was nothing left to add. That same week, an email from the auction house confirmed the sale of one of Martin's seized items. The riding lawn mower, the $8,700 monument to suburban vanity, had sold for $960. The buyer was a small landscaping company in town. The money was wired directly into the Hart Legacy Scholarship account. I logged into the foundation dashboard that evening and added a note under the transaction description, "From lawn to learning." It was poetic clean and deserved to stand alone. Mini Revenge number 9 was quiet but perfect. I closed the laptop and looked around my apartment. The space felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. The past year had been an odyssey through betrayal, bureaucracy, and hard-won restoration. Yet the victory wasn't the money. It was the silence that came afterward, the kind of peace that doesn't need witnesses. My mother visited the following weekend with lemon bars and news. He's been assigned to sort donation boxes at the community center, she said, trying not to sound amused. Yesterday, they had him labeling envelopes for the scholarship fund. I nearly dropped my fork. You're joking. Not at all, she grinned. He said it's therapeutic. That's poetic justice, I said. No, she replied softly. It's growth, just very delayed. I thought about that for a long moment. Maybe she was right. Maybe justice wasn't about winning. Maybe it was about forcing truth to finally meet consequence. In his case, that meant stamping envelopes addressed to the very scholarship born from his downfall. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the river, I walked to the old French Broad Trail, where everything had begun, the same place he once bragged about his house, by the water. The for sale sign still stood on the lot, faded by rain and sun. The windows were empty now, curtains gone, the driveway cracked. A squirrel darted across the uncut lawn. The world moved on without him. I stood for a moment watching the reflection of the river ripple under the golden light. My phone buzzed with an email alert. It was from the foundation portal. New applicant submitted Hart Legacy Scholarship. I opened it. The essay began. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep me in school. I want to study finance so I can protect people like her from being taken advantage of. I smiled at the screen. Full circle, I thought. Betrayal had created legacy. As I walked back toward the parking lot, I passed 2 maintenance workers loading scrap into a truck. One of them held up a broken piece of the old lawnmower frame. "You want this for keepsake," he joked. I shook my head. "No," I said. "It already taught its lesson." He laughed. "Fair enough." That night, I wrote my final entry in the digital journal I had kept since the first court filing. March 24, 2024, case closed, fund restored, balance achieved. Under it, I added one more line: justice, when quiet echoes longer. Before sleeping, I opened the foundation site one last time and checked the balance. The scholarship fund had grown contributions trickling in from donors who'd followed the story. It was becoming something real, something clean. I thought about my grandfather, about the ledger he had kept, and the words he wrote, "Verify every signature." I whispered them softly before turning off the light. Justice didn't roar tonight. It hummed steady, deliberate, earned. By February 2024, winter had begun to loosen its grip on Asheville. The air smelled faintly of thawing pine and wet pavement. That morning, I opened my mailbox expecting bills and flyers, but instead found a thick envelope with the blue and white crest of the University of North Carolina Medical School. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. "Congratulations," it began. "We are pleased to inform you of your admission to the UNC medical program for fall 2024. I read the line 3 times before sitting down on the porch steps, the cold wood grounding me. The world felt quiet, like it was pausing just long enough to let the meaning sink in. This was the future that had almost been stolen, now restored with interest. Story financial victories rarely come with fanfare. They arrive in silence, folded neatly in envelopes. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless. "Did you get it?" she asked immediately. "I did," I said, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. "UNC Med. It's official." She let out a joyful cry, the kind that echoes through years of struggle. "Your grandfather would be so proud." I laughed softly. Maybe he is. There was a pause. "Lena," she said, her tone gentler, "you earned this. You fought for it." I could hear the sound of a pan sizzling in the background. "Are you cooking?" I asked. She chuckled. "I am. Got 3 orders for Saturday already. My little weekend business is actually happening." After moving out of the old house, she had rented a small place in West Asheville, a cozy single story with mint green shutters and a garden that looked wild but alive. She started offering home-cooked meals for pickup every weekend, specializing in soups, pies, and cornbread. What began as therapy turned into steady income. The first time I visited the living room smelled like rosemary and fresh bread. There was music playing softly on an old radio, and her ledger, meticulously organized, sat open on the dining table. She grinned when I arrived. "Everything in cash," she said proudly. "No joint accounts, no shared cards. Just me." I hugged her tightly. "You did it, Mom." "We did," she corrected. That night after dinner, I sat in her small kitchen and watched her pack tomorrow's orders. "Do you ever think about him?" I asked quietly. She didn't look up from the pot she was stirring. Sometimes, she admitted, but not with anger anymore. I think about how small he must have felt needing to control everything to feel safe. She set down the spoon and met my eyes. I don't want to live like that. I want to build, not hoard. I smiled. That's the difference between fear and love, I said. Fear locks things up. Love keeps receipts. She laughed. You and your receipts. When I got home later that night, I unpacked my study materials, organized a new binder labeled Med Prep, and noticed the small silver USB still sitting on my desk, the one that had once held the recording that exposed everything. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to move it. It was more than evidence. It was a symbol of survival. But now with the case closed and the future unfolding, it no longer needed to be a weapon. I opened my drawer and took out a roll of white label tape. On the new label, I wrote 3 simple words in neat handwriting: proof of love. I placed the USB beside my grandfather's photograph, the one where he stood in front of his old accounting office sleeves, rolled up smiling like he already knew life was about hard lessons and clean books. The photo frame leaned slightly forward as if nodding in approval. A few days later, an email from the university's financial office arrived. Due to an external scholarship contribution, your tuition for the first semester has been reduced by 20%. I blinked, rereading the message. The attached document listed the source Hart Legacy Scholarship. I laughed out loud, shaking my head. The fund I had created to help others had just helped me. Revenge story money always loops back to irony. I called Lucas to tell him. That's poetic, he said, laughing. You literally paid yourself for surviving. I'll take it, I said. Poetry spends the same as cash. March came with longer days and softer skies. The scholarship fund continued to grow, fueled by small donations and word-of-mouth stories. I received letters from recipients describing how it had changed their lives. One wrote that she was the first in her family to go to college. Another said she was studying accounting because numbers tell the truth even when people don't. Each message felt like a quiet echo of closure. On weekends, I helped my mother with her cooking deliveries, driving through the hilly streets of Asheville with warm trays in the back seat. We'd stop by local shops, wave to neighbors, and sometimes end the day by the river, sitting in silence as the sun melted behind the water. Do you ever miss the old house? I asked once. She shook her head. No. Houses remember noise. This one only remembers food. I smiled. Then it's perfect. In April, I received an invitation from the Asheville Community Center. They wanted me to give a short talk about the scholarship and financial empowerment. The irony wasn't lost on me. Standing in the same hall where Martin once lectured about wealth responsibility, I spoke about transparency, documentation, and respect. I ended the talk by saying, trust is the only investment that compounds forever, but only if you audit it. The audience laughed and clapped. My mother watched from the front row, proud tears glistening in her eyes. Later that evening, we celebrated with a small dinner at her house. She brought out a pie and set it on the table between us. For the record, she said with a playful smile, I bought every ingredient myself, and I have the receipt, I joked. We both laughed until our sides hurt. When I drove home that night, the city lights shimmered in the distance. My inbox pinged with a notification from the scholarship platform. Another donation, another story continuing. I realized then that justice didn't end when the judge signed the papers or when the restitution cleared. Justice continued quietly every time someone learned, protected, built, or forgave without forgetting. Before bed, I opened my journal one last time. February 2024, I wrote, New beginnings do not erase the past, they verify it. Beneath the line, I added the final sentence. Some receipts pay for more than goods. They pay for peace. The last mention of Martin Keene appeared quietly in the Asheville Citizen-Times on a Wednesday morning in May. The headline was small, tucked beneath a local tax update. Former businessman barred from fiduciary management for 10 years, following education fund scandal. The article was factual, almost detached, listing the conditions of his restriction, the restitution already paid, and the community service hours still pending. There were no quotes, no drama, just closure written in bureaucratic ink. Toxic family stories rarely get fairy tale endings. They end in paperwork and silence. Still reading it, I felt a calm that went deeper than satisfaction. It wasn't triumph, it was balance restored. A week later, I opened my inbox to find a new message from the Hart Legacy Scholarship contact form. The subject line read, "Thank you." The sender was a second-year nursing student named Naomi Perez. Her email was short, but it stopped me in my tracks. She wrote, "Your story taught me boundaries. My father once used my savings for his debts, and I thought I had to forgive and forget. Then I saw what you did. You proved that justice can be quiet and still change everything. Thank you for giving me a chance to start again." I read it twice then, a third time, and found myself staring out the window for a long while. Revenge emotional doesn't always burn. Sometimes it heals in whispers. That weekend, I printed Naomi's message and placed it in the same folder that held my grandfather's photo and the relabeled USB marked Proof of Love. The folder was getting thicker, now filled with thank you notes, receipts, and small clippings of progress. Each page felt like evidence of a life corrected. The toxic family that once defined me had become a lesson, not a wound. The line between pain and power had blurred until only clarity remained. The hospital's hallways were bright that afternoon. I had begun my rotation at Mission Hospital as part of my pre-med training, and the rhythm of work was steady, human exhausting in the best way. I loved the sound of movement, rolling carts, intercom calls, the faint hum of conversation. Every day I learned how to fix what could be mended and let go of what could not. Sometimes, between rounds, I'd catch my reflection in the glass doors of the ICU and barely recognize the woman looking back. She was no longer the girl clutching a USB like armor. She was someone who had rebuilt herself from receipts, patience, and truth. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I paused by the tall windows overlooking the parking lot. The light filtered through the glass in thin ribbons, pale gold and blue, brushing across the floor. Outside, the city shimmered with late-day calm. Inside, everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and possibility. I rested my hand on the window and whispered to no one in particular. We made it. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about turning something cruel into something useful, transmuting betrayal into structure. The fund was still running, students were applying, and every dollar now served a purpose. My grandfather's voice echoed faintly in memory, "Verify every signature." I had, and in doing so, verified myself. My mother called that evening. She was packing food orders for the weekend. Naomi's email made me cry, she said. "You're helping people you've never met." I smiled. "It's the same thing you do with your meals, just different ingredients." She laughed softly. "He would have been proud." "I know," I said. "He already taught us how to balance the books." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever think you'll forgive him, Martin?" I asked. "Maybe, but not today. Forgiveness without understanding is just forgetting, and forgetting is dangerous." She exhaled. "Then don't forget. Just live." "That's the plan," I said. Later that night, I walked through the empty hospital corridor again. The vending machines hummed, a monitor beeped faintly somewhere down the hall, and a janitor polished the floor until it gleamed. I reached the same window from earlier, the city now glowing under a pale blue dusk. My reflection stared back, steady, composed, whole. I thought about everything that had happened, the gaslight, the trial, the recordings, the collapse, and felt no anger left. Only gratitude for precision, for evidence, for survival through truth. He thought recordings would damn me. They saved us. If you believe in quiet justice and silent revenge, share for truth and closure. This is standing up for yourself, dignity over money, emotional resilience, reclaiming respect. Let us choose revenge through truth, not hate, and learn the lesson in betrayal together.